So why do some images turn out really bright and others turn out really dark? Well, it's all about the exposure triangle. In this video, we'll explain it to you in 90 seconds. In short, the exposure triangle controls how much light enters the camera. First, you have the shutter speed. A faster shutter will let less light enter the camera and freeze the action. A slower shutter will keep the shutter open for longer, letting more light in and keeping motion blur. Aperture is the opening on the lens. Now, the metric for aperture gets a little confusing. The lower the f-stop or the f number, the more open your aperture is, letting more light in and blurring your background. A higher f number closes down your aperture, letting less light in, but keeping your image sharp from front to back. ISO is your camera's sensitivity to light. The lower your ISO, the cleaner your image. As you increase ISO, your image gets brighter, but it also becomes more grainy. Now, these settings work together. If you increase one, you might have to reduce another in order to maintain correct exposure. But we'll dive into this in detail in a video to come. Today we're in the studio, and this is usually Erica's set, but we're stealing it from her so we can demonstrate the concept of the exposure triangle. Now, the exposure triangle is only complicated because it's a balancing act. Where do you bring exposure from? And what compromises come from taking exposure from that area? So I like to think of the exposure triangle as two triangles. One triangle, which is ISO, aperture, and shutter speed, and a second hidden triangle, which is the trade-off that comes with all of those attributes. So ISO has noise, aperture has depth of field, and shutter speed has motion blur. Whenever we think about where we want to get that exposure from, we have to think about the compromises that come as a result of it. For example, if you take exposure from shutter speed, then you're also going to introduce noise into your image, and that's understood. But it's a little bit more complicated when it's things like aperture. When you reduce your f-stop, you essentially open up your aperture, letting more light in, but also increasing depth of field. And depth of field is not the easiest concept to grasp if you've never seen it before. But we're going to show you exactly what it looks like in our next video. Hopefully this is starting to make sense. But the question then becomes, if you're in manual mode, what setting do you set first? Well, you could not think too much, turn on your camera, point at your scene, and take a picture. If the image is too dark, like it is in my picture, you'll just increase ISO and take it once again. But there is a more logical approach on how to get your exposure correct fast. But before we do that, we'll need to really understand the setting. And that's exactly what we'll do in the next few videos. Now that you know the basics of the exposure triangle, let's deep dive into one of those concepts. Let's look at shutter speed and how you can freeze the action or maintain beautiful motion blur. Hit subscribe and let's go.